Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 9th annual Harrisburg Book Festival hosted by the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. My name is Alex. I'm with the festival, and as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore for our virtual events. Before we get started here tonight, I'd like to give the book festival a solid plug. We had our third day of our outdoor tent sale with over 10,000 books priced at $1, $2, and $3, which will take place every day through Sunday of this week across from the bookstore in the grass lot. The bookstore will be open as well, and we'll also be hosting a virtual event every evening through Sunday. If you're local or regionally located, we'd love to see you. This is a huge time of the year for the bookstore. It takes a lot of work and preparation, so please, please, please come out, support your indies, buy a signed copy of Dr. Blain's book, and we hope you come away with another book or three after this weekend. But at this time, I'd like to hand it off to Midtown Scholar Bookstore's very own Amani Taylor, who will be introducing our speakers.
Good evening, everyone. So Damon Young is a writer and critic. His debut memoir, White Doesn't Kill You, Makes You Blacker, a memoir and essays, is a tragicomic exploration of the angst, anxieties, and absurdities of existing while Black in America, and won the 2020 Thurber Prize for American Humor and Barnes & Noble's 2019 Discover Award. It was nominated for both an NAACP Image Award and a Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and is a Cross Essay Prize nominee. NPR, which named it one of the best books of 2019, called it an outstanding collection of nonfiction. Young is also the co-founder of the culture blog Very Smart Brothers, coined the blackest thing that ever happened to the internet by the Washington Post, and is written for the New York Times, GQ, The Atlantic, Esquire, New York Mag, Ebony, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Dr. Keisha N. Blain is an award-winning historian of the 20th century United States, with broad interests and specializations in African American history, the modern African diaspora, and women's and gender studies. She's an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh, the president of the African American Intellectual History Society, and a columnist for MSNBC. She's currently a fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard University and a member of the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study. Dr. Blain has published extensively on race, gender, and politics in both national and global perspectives. She is the author of a multi-prize winning book, Set the World on Fire, Black Nationalist Women and the Global Struggle for Freedom, and co-editor of To Turn the Whole World Over, Black Women in Internationalism, Perspectives on the Black Intellectual Tradition, and Charleston Syllabus, Readings on Race, Racism, and Racial Violence, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, 400 Souls, A Community History of African America, 1619 through 2019, edited with Ibram X. Kendi. Of course, Dr. Blain's new book that we are here for this evening is titled Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America. Bestselling author Clint Smith writes that the book is a rich, detailed, and moving portrait of one of the most important civil rights activists in American history. Just some quick housekeeping. If you have a question for Dr. Blain or Damon, please use the Q&A button towards the bottom of the screen. We'd love to hear from you, so ask away at any point, and we'll try to get as many questions as possible towards the end of the program. If you are interested in purchasing a signed copy of Until I Am Free, we'd love for you to purchase it through the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. Once again, this is the #1 way to support the festival, the event series, and the bookstore. For all of our festival books, we are offering free media mail shipping with the discount code HBG Bookfest. So look in the chat room in a couple moments, and I'll be providing the link there for you, or simply head to hbgbookfest.com. Again, we do have signed copies of the book available for purchase. Now, without further ado, the Harrisburg Book Festival presents Dr. Keisha Blain and Damon Young.
Thank you. Thank you, Imani. Thank you for that introduction. And I have to admit some jealousy of Imani's glasses. She had the best pair of glasses that I've seen in a long time. I am jealous about those. So Keisha, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. It's funny. I believe this is the first time we met face to face, and
Right.
we've been in the same city
Right.
for a minute in this, and now we're meeting virtually through Harrisburg. And I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh, but I've actually never stepped foot in Harrisburg before. So I'm going to have to change that. I'm going to have to be there.
Yeah. This is how COVID-19 has changed right? Everything. So,
Yeah.
but it's really great. It's really great to be here and to be in conversation with you. As I told you, I'm such a fan of your work. So this is a treat for me.
Well, thank you for that. And this is an honor to be a part of your book launch week. I mean, how's that going so far?
It's busy to say the least, but I won't complain. I'm really grateful that people are interested in talking about the book. I'm interested, I'm just that means the world to me as an author, and you certainly understand when you've worked on a project and you put it out into the world, you never know how people will respond. So it feels great that there's so much excitement around it.
Yeah, an anxiety. There's definitely an anxiety that comes along with that process. And as people I'm sure can hear, I have two very small children, 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, who are very 2 and very 5 and very awake right now.
Mhm.
They'll be going to bed soon, but hey, this is this is pandemic COVID life right now. So that we just got to deal with it.
Exactly.
um, so Keisha, I'm curious, why what drew you
Mhm.
to Fannie Lou Hamer? What drew you to write this book? What was impetus for this?
Yeah. Well, as I explained in the introduction, I first learned about Fannie Lou Hamer in the spring of 2008. I was a senior in college, and I was taking a course on the American Civil Rights Movement. And by then, I had already declared a major in history. I was also, double majoring in Africana Studies. And so I was taking all of these courses on the Black experience, certainly in the US context, but also globally. And it's surprising to me that it took so long to finally encounter this remarkable activist. There were so many things that stood out to me then. First, I was really taken aback by, what I explained in the book as her radical honesty. Hamer was someone who truly spoke, truth to power. She did not mince words. If she felt it, she would tell you, and she wasn't really worried about your comfort level, about your feelings. She just told you what needed to be said. And in fact, as I explained in the book, one of her mantras was to tell it like it is. She certainly did that. So I was really taken aback by her radical honesty. I think even more so, I connected with her because of her background. As I explained in the introduction, I'm a first generation college student, coming from a working class family. And, I was in a place, in a space where I often felt like I didn't belong in a predominantly white institution. And certainly this has been the case, I think, even since college. I'm often in spaces where I feel this way. And I remember just, as a young Black woman in college reading about Hamer, I remember just feeling so connected to her and empowered by reading her story, because this was a woman with a 6th grade education, who had been a sharecropper, who joined the movement fairly late in life. She walked with a limp. This is a disabled Black woman activist. And she had very few material resources, yet she left such a remarkable impact. She really, as I explained, laid the groundwork for the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. She spoke out boldly against, state-sanctioned violence, was a human rights activist. So many things about her was remarkable. And I found inspiration in her story, but more so, I think she inspired me to figure out how I could use my own skills and abilities to contribute in some meaningful way. And so learning about Hamer, I think, was a personal, transformational moment for me. And I'm just thrilled. I think at the time I never imagined that I would write a book on Hamer. I certainly wanted to write books about Black people. I wanted to write about the Black experience, nationally as well as globally. And I'm just thrilled that so many years later, I had the opportunity to tell this story, and more so that I could tell this story now in the context of everything that we've all experienced in the last few years, And here I'm thinking about the uprisings of last year, last spring and last summer, as well as, even the challenge of COVID-19. All of these are connected in some way to Hamer's story.
Now, you mentioned her being, or I guess this education, this introduction being a transformative experience for you. So can you expound a bit more on that? Like exactly how did that manifest with, I guess, changing who you were or shifting who you were pre-introduction to who you are and who you continue to evolve to be?
So I battled a lot of self-doubt. And I think, there are certainly moments even now where I have questions, and I think that's just normal, as people live out their lives, sometimes you feel more confident. One day you feel really strong, another day not so much. But for me, I just battled self-doubt. So that feeling of feeling out, that sort of the moment where you feel out of place. For me, it was really asking myself the question, do I belong? I remember someone saying to me, you major in history, you say you want to become a historian, why? Do you know historians? Is there some historian that you might have met growing up? And I struggled to answer the question because I didn't necessarily want to explain to them, well, no, I didn't. In fact, I had not even encountered a historian until college. I had not, quite frankly, I had not encountered a Black person with a PhD until college. That did not even make sense to me, right? I mean, it was just being in a community that I certainly am grateful for, and I would not change one thing, but it was so hard for me to be, in a space where I did not know what to expect, and I didn't even know, there was no one I could call. I couldn't call back home and say, okay, how do I navigate this? Here I am away from home. I had actually left home, was living on the campus. And so there's a sense of feeling, alienated, to an extent from one's family, being away at college. But more to the point, I just thought, okay, I can understand how someone who comes from a middle class or elite background could do great things, right? I can understand how someone who has an array of resources and access to all of these things could leave an impact. But me, I didn't think that was possible. In fact, when one of my professors, who just a great mentor, said to me, you could get a PhD, you could, apply to the top programs, in your field. I thought it was a joke. I thought to myself, this guy is really delusional. How does he imagine that I could obtain a PhD? How does he imagine that I could do any of these things? Doesn't he understand that I'm from a poor background? Like, doesn't he understand that this is simply not what I could do given the limitations? But I think Hamer's story was a moment where it became clear to me, you have to focus less on the things you don't have and more so on the things that you do have. Well, what did I have? Everyone said to me, you're a good writer, you're a good researcher. And I thought, okay, maybe so. This is a way that I could contribute to the world. If I'm good at telling, stories, if I'm good at writing, if I'm good at doing research, and then I might as well do that. And, hopefully leave a positive mark. And so I think the encounter with Hamer was a shift, which I think carried me into graduate school, because I went from SUNY Binghamton to Princeton. If I felt out of place at SUNY Binghamton, then you better believe, when I arrived at Princeton, I thought, how in the world am I going to survive here? I barely understand half of what these folks are talking about, right? I mean, and I'm talking about it in a social setting. It's sort of, it might be hard, I think, for many people to grasp, but I'll just give like a quick story to contextualize what I mean. I remember being on the campus, having conversations with people, and someone said to me, so where do you summer? And I remember thinking, what does that even mean? I've never heard the word summer used in that way. And I was like, well, Brooklyn, Brooklyn, that's where, that's where my family is. Of course, I later understood what they meant. And I thought, wow, I'm like a fish out of water. Like, this doesn't even make any sense to me. But I had to push past that and say, you know what, forget all of that. I'm here for a reason. someone believed that I had the ability, and I have to have confidence in myself that I can do something here and just not worry about all these other things. I don't have to actually fit in. And I think that's the key, right? Hamer didn't fit in. And for me, the message was, it's okay. People can call you an oddball. Like, that's okay. What matters is that you are true to your purpose. What matters is that you are living out the life that you are meant to live, that you are doing what you're supposed to do, and don't worry about the rest. And so I love her, her tenacity, her passion, and I hope that people, reading her story will be inspired the way that I was.
You described like this, like almost like an upper hidden level of bougie where people were, you use summer as a verb. Right? It's like, whoa, I didn't know that level existed. I'm just barely at the brunch level. I didn't know that summer
right
as a verb. I didn't realize that was even possible. To just change the way words are congregated.
Right.
Wow. And what you're describing, I feel like it's characterized very often as imposter syndrome. But with us, with Black Americans, particularly people who are first, the first graduates in their family, or who maybe come from, financially insecure backgrounds, it's not so much the imposter syndrome. It's like you're supposed to be there.
Right.
Where and the anxiety maybe comes from other people doubting, but not you. It's like, what, I did my work. I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I know I'm supposed to be here. And I feel like there needs to be a term that describes that specific dynamic, because it's not the traditional, imposter syndrome. And again, hearing about your background, and also, after reading this book, you just see a very similar sort of relationship to that experience, right?
Yeah.
And and you mentioned not necessarily being exposed to her until college, and I'm gonna keep it a buck. For me, I'm 42 years old, so maybe 15 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
So I went through college. I was a teacher. I was an English teacher. Then I worked on a college campus, and there are so many icons from that era,
right,
who get flattened out in the retelling of the story because we platform MLK and Malcolm X. And so, do you think that's still happening?
It is. In fact, I think I was reflecting on this just a few weeks ago. I saw a manifestation of this, a publication, I believe it was The Hill, and we're doing this virtually, so someone can check me, but I believe it was The Hill had announced the passing of Gloria Richardson, who is another remarkable civil rights activist, who we don't talk about enough. And she passed away about several weeks ago, and the announcement was about her passing using the image of MLK. And of course, immediately, Gloria Richardson's biographer, Joseph Fitzgerald, who's written a remarkable book on her, he was upset, as many others, calling it out, saying, "Look, what in the world are you doing?" One might argue, well, listen, maybe they couldn't find a photo of her. Well, actually, do a Google search, you can find photos of her, and there are photos in public domain. So not quite sure,
she had one of the most iconic photos.
The most iconic, exactly. How do you miss it? And for me, I think the message, certainly the message that I got, and I suspect other people did as well, was that, well, we're talking about the civil rights movement, so voila, king. Like, what other image do you need, right? It's sort of like he becomes the only image, the stand-in for the civil rights movement. And this is not, slight on King. Obviously, we know the contributions that he made to the civil rights movement. We have to talk about his work and his ideas. That's not question, but it's about what happens when you overlook an array of figures, right? What happens when you overlook an array of people who contributed to the movement, and particularly women, right? What happens when you fall into the trap of telling these male-dominated narratives, which, I mean, apart the, far beyond the fact that one might be offended, by these male-dominated narratives, more to the point, they're inaccurate. They're inaccurate because even in the instance of King, as I tell my students all the time, we would not even know about Martin Luther King Jr., if it were not for the fact that his career took off, right, in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, at the moment of the Montgomery bus boycott, right? That's the moment that he rises to national prominence. Well, how did he end up doing that? I'll tell you how, because of the critical work of Black women. Folks like Joanne Robinson and other women in the Women's Political Council, they're the ones who organize on the ground, who conceptualize and launch this movement. And then King became the face of the movement. And from there, the rest is history. We see King everywhere. And of course, we see, him in the context of the '63 March on Washington that most people will cite. But the point is that women were vital to the movement. They weren't just there just to be, no, they were vital to the movement as activists, certainly, but as organizers, as strategists. And so when we tell these narratives that only focus on a handful of people, and when we tell these male-dominated narratives, we're actually not presenting the full picture of the history. And so it's inaccurate, as much as it is offensive. So I think Fannie Lou Hamer's exclusion, or I should say marginalization, because I certainly want to give homage to the number of remarkable historians who have written about her, historians and other scholars. And I'm, shout out to Shauna Kiley, whose work on Hamer is actually the first book that I had read on Fannie Lou Hamer, and so many others have written on Hamer too. But the point is that I think her story needs to be centered so that people understand that it took a community, right? It took grassroots leaders, it took an array of individuals to make change possible. And it wasn't just one or two, right? It was a vibrant movement. And so Hamer is certainly part of that narrative.
And, in the narrative of the exceptional male, right? The exceptional male leader, the charismatic male, I think that also contributes to that anxiety that creates that, if not imposter syndrome, that feeling of, am I in the right place? Are people, are people taking my work seriously and taking me seriously? Because, if you don't have the history, then, you go through school and you get these, achievements, occupations or whatever, thinking that maybe I'm the first, or I'm the only, or, what I'm doing. And the thing is, you could be doing a unique and transformative and radical thing, but also realizing, hey, it wasn't just MLK, it wasn't just Malcolm X, it wasn't, just John Lewis. There were women who were part of this movement, who led the movement, and again, I don't know. I just keep coming back to that idea of just that, I guess, that void in narrative and also in education, because it has a tremendous devastating impact on how we, I don't know, just how we think about the past and how we even treat ourselves and think about the movement today. There's one part, in your book that, or there's a few parts that were very new information for me, but one part in particular that stuck with me was her pushback on the term auntie. And now with her, it was more a racial context, where telling white boys, like, I'm not your aunt, I'm not your auntie, I don't have any white nieces or nephews, call me by my name. And it's this, magnifying, desexualizing sort of thing that again, that white people did and still do. But were you a part of the whole conversation a couple years, or do you remember the whole conversation a couple years ago about auntie and the pushback on that, where it became like a, not just a Twitter thing, but a cultural sort of, I guess, reiteration of Black women saying, actually, saying auntie this and auntie that is Yeah, just call me by my name.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of, it's perhaps similar to how we talk about the N word, though I'm not suggesting it's the same because clearly there are so many layers there. But I think of the parallel because it's often a question of who is uttering the word, right? And so for Hamer, it's yes, calling her auntie, calling her girl, that's so offensive. And part of what she's emphasizing is that these terms are, they're coming out of the mouths of white people, and she understands that when she's being called auntie, it's not a term of endearment, right? It's not this lovingly auntie, because we understand that other context, right? I mean, Black people to each other, I might talk about Maxine Waters or something and say, oh, auntie, things like that. Even if you don't know a person well and you don't have that kind of personal relationship, you may use it affectionately within the race, I'll say. And that's not what Hamer's talking about. And Hamer's talking about a practice that I think many people can understand. And I think of it this way. I won't, without naming the institution, there was a period of my life where I worked, I taught in a department where I was the only Black woman in the department. And I was working with a Black woman who's a grad student in the department. And constantly, like the whole year, first year, whole year, they kept confusing the two of us, just kept confusing the two of us. And, they'd see her and it's like, hi, it's like, hi, Dr. Blain. They'd see me, they'd call me her name. And both of us would be correcting people, like, no, that we're different. And I chuckle when I think about it now, because beyond the offensive aspect of it, we look nothing alike. Like, we really look nothing alike. We're talking about, like, I have braids, like this person has a really short haircut, like it doesn't make any sense. And I remember thinking, I kept trying to explain, and certain colleagues would, I remember one colleague saying, I just don't understand, like, what's, oh, people just forget. And I said, no, but people don't confuse Mary and Beth, right? So there's something to be said about the fact that you hired me, I'm a professor here, and you don't even know what I look like. And it's offensive to me. And I'm telling you that you need to pay attention to me enough to actually be able to identify me in the street, right? There's some effort that it takes, and I'm asking you to take the effort, to make the effort rather. And I think about it, when Hamer criticized those who called her auntie, right? It's this way of almost denying someone's personhood and just saying, well, all Black people look alike, right? So it's like, whatever, auntie, girl, does it really matter who I'm talking to? Do I have to know your name? No, because there isn't enough respect to identify who it is you're speaking to. And so I think this is part of what Hamer was getting to, and we saw it too. I mean, we see it in other contexts, referring to a Black man as boy, right? I mean, it's these demeaning terms that are meant to signify, that the person doesn't deserve any kind of respect and dignity. And Hamer called that out. And I think certainly that is part of understanding her, her gender politics. As I explained in the book, she did not call herself a feminist, but we do see the threads of Black feminist thought in the way that she responded in that context, as well as others.
Sorry. The boy and auntie, particularly from white people, is interesting dynamic. I was with my dad. This was like a couple years ago. We were shopping Giant Eagle, and white boy at the register, probably like 19, 20 years old, calls my dad buddy. Now, I had seen him refer to other people as buddy that were ahead of us in line, like, hey, all right, thanks, buddy. But my dad flipped. And and at the time, I was like, Dad, come on. But then, I thought about it, and it's like, well, my dad is 70 years old.
Yeah.
You need to address an elder not the same way you would dress one of your peers, because he ain't your peer. He's an obviously gray-haired, obviously, elderly Black man, and you don't call him that. Maybe he would react differently if it was a younger or older Black male, who had done that. But I think just the racial context plus the age thing was just, like you get it. And it's those little microaggressions, those little just nicks that have a way of, fucking with you.
And I get it. I mean, even as a professor, I mean, I tell people all the time, like, you want to really get people riled up, insist on being called professor or doctor. When you are a Black woman on a campus and you say, listen, I have a PhD, just like all these other folks here, do not address me as, hey, Keisha. Like I get it, Keisha, you hear the name and you're thinking, yeah, I'm just going to be cool. No, we're not friends in that way, right? And it's and you see it play out. I mean, I have been on sometimes email threads, and then it's like Professor so and so, Dr. so and so, and Keisha. You're just like, wow, what's that about? Yeah,
Wow.
and when you call it out, people, so difficult. No, not at all, because there's something, there's a meaning behind it, right? When a student walks into a classroom and or rather, or even they're walking through the halls and they can call all these other folks professor and doctor, as a show of respect, and they see me and they call me by my first name, and I have to say to them, actually, I don't go by Keisha, I go by Dr. Blain or Professor Blain, your choice. We understand what's happening there, right? I mean, it shows up in the teaching evaluations. You get one of two things. It's, she thinks she's all that, because she has a PhD, she thinks she's all that. Well, everyone has a PhD here who's teaching you. And I don't think I'm all that. I'm just the professor who's supposed to come and teach. Or the flip side, this person doesn't know anything. All they're doing is teaching about race. I thought this was a class on American history. That's my favorite. Taught a class on race, racism. I think it was called race in politics. No, it was race and politics in American history. And they critiqued me for, first, and they said I spoke too much about race and racism. Well, they wanted more of the American history part, whatever that means, right? I mean, it just, these are things that appear small to so many people, but they're not small, right? I mean, I understand what's happening. Others understand what's happening in the space. And I think, just going back to Hamer, she understood. So what some people might have said as, listen, why talk about how people address you? There are other bigger things to address. No, that may seem small, but it's not completely divorced from a conversation about racism, right? I mean, it's not. It's disrespect. It's an effort to demean, to really, I think, belittle someone. And that is very much part of a larger conversation about racism. That is very much part of a conversation about human dignity and respect and so on. So I think, what I hope with the book, that was, one of my intentions in writing the book, is obviously to provide, a historical lesson, so to speak, but more so, my hope is that people will read it and be able to connect it to the contemporary moment, maybe what they are seeing in their communities, and what they might even be experiencing, and be able to see in Hamer's words, in Hamer's example, the kinds of potential, for at least the potential strategies for how one might respond, and how one might attempt at least to overcome these kinds of injustices.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what you were saying, I mean, language is the colonizers' first and most important conquest. Dictating how you can talk, what you can learn, what you're going to be called, what you can call each other, all of that. Yeah, as you're saying, all of that is intentional, and it bleeds out where things that we may consider innocuous are part of, that legacy that
Right.
we're actively, dismantling and subverting and trying to destroy. Um, we have a bunch of questions, some really good questions that I want to get through right now. And please, if you have any more questions for Dr. Blain, please, I can call her Keisha because we homies, but if you have any more questions for Dr. Blain, Professor Blain, please.
Now I've terrified
Please,
everyone.
please share them. All right, let me get, okay, this is from Sarah. What's the most surprising thing you learned about Fannie Lou Hamer during your research?
Oh, wow. I think I was a bit surprised about her internationalist vision. And I say that because when we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, if we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, we are generally speaking of her through the context of, her work to expand Black political rights. In the U.S. context, that's the framing of how we discuss Hamer. So as I'm doing the research, I'm surprised by, I remember one of the things that I found was an interview that she did in which she tells the reporter, I'm not fighting for civil rights, I'm fighting for human rights. And I remember just being thrilled, to have found that, because that opened up a window into several things. And as I started to piece together the narrative, what became clear was that Hamer had a transformative experience in 64. So towards the end of September of 1964, this is after, the famed, speech that she gave at the Democratic National Convention.
Mm-hmm.
She traveled with a group of SNCC activists to Guinea, right, on the African continent. And this trip was transformative for Hamer. I think many people might be surprised to know that Hamer spent some time in Guinea. We don't often talk about that, but she was there. And while she was there, she later reflected on the experience. She said that it was transformative for her to see Black people leading, to see Black people in positions of power, right? Remember that, Guinea was a newly independent African nation. So Hamer is visiting, during the time that Sekou Touré is leading as president. And she met with him. She met with members of his administration. She shared her experiences with them. She listened to what they had to say. And she saw before her the possibilities, right, of what could happen when Black people are given the space and opportunity. And to be fair, I shouldn't even say given, because I don't want to imply, that decolonization was some sort of process by which someone handed anything to Black people. We understand through the history that Black people fought, relentlessly fought for their liberation. But I think in that context, Hamer just saw the possibilities of what Black people could do, right? As leaders, the kinds of societies that they could build. I think for her, seeing Black people in all aspects of leadership, in the government, just in the day-to-day experiences, it just uplifted her. And because it was completely different than what she was experiencing in the Mississippi Delta. But what it also did for her was it got her to think deeply about the connections between what was happening place in the US context and what was happening place globally. And so what we see, as I talk about in the book, is that she begins to draw these parallels. So there's one moment where she's talking about Mississippi and she's calling out, white officials for their neglect, right? And the way that they are not even caring about the concerns of Black people in the Mississippi Delta. And she says, but you're so busy worried about what's happening in some other part of the world, right? And she's calling out US officials, she's condemning, she's critiquing US foreign policy. And she's saying, you're so busy inserting yourself supposedly to maintain democracy abroad. Meanwhile, folks don't have food to eat, right? Folks are struggling to make ends meet. You're not attending to the citizens of the United States. So what are you doing, all over the place, getting involved in other people's business? She would frame it this way. And so she condemned the US involvement in Vietnam and did so very early before many other civil rights activists felt comfortable enough to say it publicly. She said it. And so all of these things to me was pretty, it was surprising in a good way, because it showed not only the evolution of her thoughts, but it just showed how much she is a pivotal figure, not only to the civil rights story, but more so to the broader narrative of human rights. And I'm writing a book now about Black women and the struggle for human rights. So I'm just, I'm thinking a lot about this. And I just see Hamer as part of this narrative in a powerful way.
Thank you. Next question. Okay, from Eleanor, is there someone from American history that you believe deserves this sort of treatment, deserves a biography that maybe has been overlooked in the historical narrative?
Yes, there's so many people. And I would say too that the good news is that there are so many biographies in the work. So one person who comes to mind, again, because I've been thinking about her, for this other project, is Queen Mother Audley Moore. And I'm thrilled, one of my friends who's a historian, Ashley Farmer, is writing a biography on Queen Mother Audley Moore. This is someone who I suspect some people have heard of her in passing, but perhaps not, because similar to Fannie Lou Hamer, there really has not been, I think, the kind of robust engagement with her ideas. She was, it's even hard to condense her activism, because this is a person who was involved in the Garvey movement in the 1920s. She was a Black nationalist who moved into the Communist Party, then left the Communist Party, and then ended up playing a pivotal role in mentoring Black power activists, right? So she sort of moved from Black nationalism to Black communism, ultimately a Black radical who had, I think, similar to Hamer, sort of internationalist perspective, always looking for ways to draw parallels, right, to, between what's taking place in the US, what's happening globally, a Pan-Africanist. So just a remarkable activist and intellectual who, I mentioned that she mentored all of these Black power activists. Malcolm X regarded her, as a key figure in his life and in the development of his ideas. So it's interesting, we know about Malcolm X, but maybe not about Audley Moore. So that's someone who I think certainly deserves not just one, but several biographies. And I'm thrilled that Professor Farmer is working on one now. So that's just one quick example. I could give many, because of course, there's just a lot of people. And I suspect we'll see. We'll see how things go with writing. Sometimes you have plans and you move in new directions, but I suspect that once I'm finished with this other project, I suspect, well, I won't say, I do know there are a couple of women who I've sort of uncovered in the process of doing the research, as in, uncovered as in other people have written about them, but I've found all this great stuff about them, who I think might deserve a biography. And we'll see in the future, maybe I can write other biographies of other, women, lesser known Black women who played important roles in various sectors of society.
I appreciate that teaser. Like, you didn't name them. It was like, you know what? Stay tuned. To be continued. Okay. Okay, from John, for both of us, can you talk about your writing routine? When and where do you do your best writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I think what is so hard about this is that I've had to adjust so many things because of COVID-19. I'm sure that's true for you too. I used to love to sit down in cafes. I used to love to, well, first and foremost, I drink way too much coffee. So that's one thing. But coffee, it seems, is helpful as I'm writing. And so I love being in a cafe where I can just consume, the smell of coffee, be able, and I like the kind of vibrancy in the space, always writing with headphones. Which is odd. I generally play music. A lot of people are like, how do you, but it is what it is. I'll play music. The music varies depending on what I'm writing. If I need some motivation, maybe it'll be hip hop one day. If I just feel like, okay, I need a, sort of a mellow kind of feel, I'll play some jazz, but always listening to music, drinking coffee, and pulling together, my ideas on paper. Now, with COVID-19, had to step away from the cafe. So I do right now all of my writing at home, and I just found it useful. I think several things. One, I find it useful to write, early in the morning. And Damon, I'm curious to hear what you answer, because we have a similar situation, because we both have, you have two young children, I have a young child, and like once they're up, that it feels like the day is like they just control the rest of the day. So writing very early in the morning has been effective in order to just make sure that, okay, I have quiet, no interruptions. And then I also feel like, okay, I've done something meaningful for the day. And even if I never get back to writing for the whole day, I don't feel as guilty because I got it done first thing in the morning. So that's my process. Early in the morning, drinking coffee, listening to music. And just one quick thing, which might be useful for writers listening. I always use an outline, which I find so helpful. I don't know if that's true for you, Damon, but I always I outline. I mean, even for op-eds, I just finished. I write for MSNBC. As you mentioned, I just finished an op-ed earlier today. I spent the whole 2 whole days just mapping it out from start to finish, and that means I'm just too slow in the process. But I like to be able to visualize what the piece looks like right from start to finish, and then flesh it out. That to me is pretty effective.
Do you have a favorite spot in Pittsburgh back when you were, able to be public and be at cafes or anything like that?
Oh, yes, there is a spot, and now I'm completely blanking on the name, of course.
You know
now
what?
that you've asked.
And you know what? And if you don't want to share, I don't want everyone to start converging to try to get some paparazzi,
Right,
view of
right.
you.
And then I won't be able to go there
we can keep
anymore,
it. We can
right?
keep it. Yeah, we
Because
can keep
then
it
it's
low.
like, oh, that's where she writes.
Yeah. And so my writing process, like you, is also adjusted tremendously because of COVID, where I also when the shutdown first happened last year, and we had to be in a house and couldn't really go out or anything like that. I wrongly anticipated it being like a boom for my writing, because I'll have all this time. I have my office at home. I have my books available. I have my snacks downstairs. I have these glasses that were a gift for my whiskey or whatever that has nothing but water in it now. And I underestimated how much I needed the energy of being in public, where I probably wrote 60% of my book while in the lobby of the Ace Hotel. And instead of writing in the morning, I would go to the Ace at night, and I would be there from maybe 9 p.m. to maybe 2 a.m. while there were parties and stuff going on. And I didn't have headphones, but I needed almost that energy and that white noise to be able to focus and just be able to just sit there, maybe get something to eat, and just work and write and be good. And so I've been trying to find a way to replicate that. Yeah. And it's been difficult. Now, I write at home and I have space and I have a privilege where I'm able to do that. But I haven't found a replacement for that public energy, that dynamic, which was a part of our process. And I underestimated how much losing that would impact me. And it definitely has. I'm trying to regain that equilibrium after 18 months of not having it. Let me see. Any other questions? All right, when people read this book, what do you want their main take? Is there a main takeaway that you want them to have when reading this book?
I think so. And it actually goes back to the title of the book. I spent a lot of time thinking about what the title would be. Until I'm Free comes from a phrase that Fannie Lou Hamer used repeatedly. And there are different variations of it, because sometimes she would say nobody's free until everybody's free. So that's one iteration. But she would also say, whether you are white or Black, you are not free until I am free. And that to me is so powerful, because what tends to happen, and this is not only true in the contemporary context, but this is true historically, is, you know, we tend to focus on our differences. Okay. And clearly there are differences among all of us. But Hamer wanted to emphasize the fact that we are all members of the American polity, right? We are all part of this great nation. And that means that if one person is, you know, in chains, then you truly, you know, regardless of your background, like no matter who you are, you can't truly experience liberation if your neighbor is in chains, right? It was a way of getting people to shift away from just the individual experience and to think more critically about the collective. It was a way to emphasize the importance of unity. It was a way to get people to imagine how they could work together to make the nation better, so that all of us, right, every single one of us, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of ability, regardless of sexuality, of gender, socioeconomic status, and so on, regardless of all of these differences, that we could work together to ensure that we could be part of this nation and not solely exist, but thrive. Of course, this is a great vision, and for Hamer, it was one that she emphasized thinking deeply about the founding values, right, of the Constitution. Now, you know, we can debate about all of these things, and we could say, well, yes, even in the context of talking about, you know, equality and liberty, this, all of the language, right, happens within the context of the institution of slavery. So it's not to overlook the contradictions, but it's simply to say, these are the core ideals, right? These are the ideals, these are the stated values, at least on paper. And we can work together to make them a reality. And so I think that's an enduring message. I hope that when people read the book, that they will begin to think about how they can contribute to making this place better. And that means not simply taking the approach, well, that doesn't happen to me, I don't understand all of that, you know, I don't, and people have said this, you know, no police officer talks to me like that, so I don't know what, you know, that's not the point. It's not about solely what you have experienced, but knowing that if someone else is going through it, then it's a problem and you have to be concerned about it too.
From Tanisha, who said hi to both of us. Hi, Tanisha. How you doing? So, you know, this is something I actually meant to bring up in our conversation, but your book really kind of weaves in a lot of present day themes with the past. You know, we talk about Breonna Taylor, you talk about Megan Thee Stallion and the op-ed she wrote, and you talk about, you know, these very contemporary issues and how they connect to Hamer's work. And what Tanisha wants to know is, can you talk a bit more about your process? What work did you do to blend intellectual history and social commentary in order to help readers understand why Hamer's political theory is relevant today?
Mm-hmm. And I have to admit that this was probably this was something that I wrestled with, because, you know, and Tanisha knows this, you know, as professional historians, we really do emphasize, as you can imagine, we emphasize context above all else, right? And so if we're talking about what's taking place, you know, in the 1930s, then we really have to talk about the Great Depression. We really have to talk about, you know, all these social forces that, you know, if we're thinking globally, we talk about social movements, you know, and the idea is that you provide a sense of the history that's grounded in the 30s, and you try to be careful not to, you know, weave into another period, because we know that the 30s is not the 60s, right? And it's not the 20s, and, you know, you really feel that pressure to stick within the confines, if you will, of the context. And so when I decided that I would weave the social commentary, I was very nervous about it. And And I was nervous about it because I didn't want to take away from Hamer's story. You know, I really wanted to make sure that people would read the book and get a good sense of who, you know, Hamer was, get a good sense of her ideas, her activism. But I also felt like it would be more effective to connect directly with what's taking place today. My sense is that if a person, for example, starts, you know, I start a chapter 2, I start with Sandra Bland. I suspect that people picking up the book, most, if not all, would have been familiar with Sandra Bland. They would know the sad story of Sandra Bland and what took place in Waller County, Texas. They would recognize that immediately. And once they were able to connect to that story, then I'd be able to step back and say, okay, now imagine Hamer traveling through Mississippi in the 1960s, being stopped by police, right? And in a similar way, right, how the officer spoke to her, the tense exchanges, the fear that she felt, and then connecting, right, to all of these other experiences that she had with state-sanctioned violence in the context of the 60s. And so I mentioned earlier how I outline. So part of what I did was I started off with identifying what are the core ideas that I wanted to grapple with, the core themes, what are the core strategies that I wanted to emphasize. And then I started sort of really just, surveying and thinking, okay, what's a contemporary example that best plays this out in a way that readers will really understand? So when you mentioned Megan, the Stallion's op-ed, I had written that chapter on Hamer's ideas about, feminism and her ideas about women's empowerment. I had all of the chapter written except the opening, because I was like, okay, what's the best example to get someone to truly understand how you can be a part of the dialogue, even shift the discourse, and yet not necessarily commit to the label feminist, right? So I was thinking, who's an individual who doesn't necessarily run around, embracing the label feminist, yet ends up speaking forcefully in a way that helps us see Black feminism, just in such a plain and but powerful way. Reading that op-ed just did it for me, and I thought, aha, here you have it. I mean, if you read through Megan Thee Stallion's op-ed, immediately you see the threads. Immediately you see how she's centering Black women. Immediately you see how she calls out, right? People who criticize her because of her dress, how people make fun of her after she goes through this, violent experience, and what it tells us about misogyny, what it tells us, right, about how Black women are treated or mistreated in American society. And so all of these things came through Hamer's speeches in the 60s, in the 70s, and Megan Thee Stallion ends up like laying that out, right? And in a way that I think people were able to connect to. So for me, it was really starting with a clear sense of what I wanted to say as it pertains to Hamer's ideas, and then trying to find a compelling example, in the contemporary moment that would connect powerfully to Hamer's story. So I hope that helps in explaining my process.
No, that was a great answer. And I think that we should end on that. That should be the last question. And that was such a great answer. And I just want to remind everybody to please buy this book. Please buy Dr. Keisha Blain's book. And it usually research heavy historical reads like this are not quick reads. But this was. Just in terms of how readable it was, and it's also, it's 130 pages or something like that, and so it's one of those types of books where every line, every word matters There's no wasted space in this entire book. And so again, and again, the way you weave the present with past and your own personal narrative and discovery is genius. And again, I just want to implore everyone, please go out, click whatever links you need to click right now and buy this book right now, please.
Thank you so much, Damon. I appreciate that. And thank you to all of you. And I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of your questions, but I really appreciate it. Someone did ask a quick question. I'll just address this about Hamer's family. And I just wanted to mention that fingers crossed, I do have plans to talk to Hamer's daughter. You have to read the book. I explained that she had adopted, two girls at one point, and then later on adopted 2 others. So I won't give away all the logistics, but there is one surviving daughter who I will be speaking to. It's on my site, but this is Jacqueline Hamer Flakes. We're going to have a conversation, fingers crossed that all the plans would move forward. And so you're welcome to join us for that.
Dr. Blain, Damon, thank you so much for this really wonderful conversation. To our audience members out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. Once again, sorry we could not get to them all, but we appreciate you. The book is Until I Am Free. We have books at the Midtown Scholar Bookstore, signed copies. So please come check us out. We're open till Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. each day, or you can just click the link and we can provide shipping for you as well. But thanks again, and everyone have a good night. Bye.